Hello everybody, welcome to our PCI talk today. We're delighted to have Willie Egan, a faculty lecturer, on board with us, and Willie is going to give a really informative talk entitled A Support Message from PCI College to Private Practice Counsellors During This Unusual Time. So Willie is going to offer some support for those working one-to-one, and his subline in this talk is A Tale of Transition, Strategic Thinking and Transparency. So, Willie, a very interesting subtitle that you have chosen for this talk. Would you like to share some of your thinking on that title?
Thanks, Jade. I certainly will. Well, I think that for most private practice counsellors, of which I am one, COVID-19 era has been just that, a tale of transition, strategic thinking, and the consequent need for additional awareness and ethical vigilance around our new way of working. The aim of my talk is to support counsellors around all of this. As regards transition, that's the first word in the subtitle. I believe that we have to look at transition from two perspectives, personal and professional. PCI's wonderful Bachelor of Science program in Counselling and Psychotherapy had a wonderful module in Year 3 called Personal and Professional Integration, and the purpose of which is to raise critical awareness of the ethical requirements to navigate the successful integration of the person and the professional within us. Based on the reality that within each counsellor there is a real person with all the same frailties and vulnerabilities as every other person, including our clients. The hypothesis being that the ethically sound professional counsellor is one who has correctly integrated the two. So if we look at transition, we have to look at it on the personal and professional. From the point of view of personal transition, Jade, for our counsellors, including myself, we can see that since its arrival, we have quickly realised that COVID has introduced us to the world of compromise. Our health has been compromised, our world as we knew it had been compromised, and our livelihoods have been compromised. Most of life signposts as we knew them have been removed, leaving us temporarily like tourists in a foreign country without maps, language, or plan. Most of us are by now getting used to moving from one groundhog day to the next, waiting for updates and directions. Initial acceptance and compliance and hope of the virus's brevity have been replaced with the reality that there seems to be no end in sight, at least short term. So as we go about our daily business, we can see that COVID-19 has certainly given a whole new meaning to Jung's concept of the masks we wear. I strongly feel that as a counsellor in private practice, my own personal transition must be at an advanced stage of processing to call myself a professional counsellor who offers an uncontaminated space to my clients. And assuming that I've achieved this, we must also acknowledge that our professional self has been thrown into the second stage of transition, the professional transition. But being a profession has as its essence people meeting people. Our profession, yours and mine, is probably a prime example of a profession suffering huge collateral damage from this virus.
And I noticed, Willie, that your title specifically refers to the private practice counsellor. Is there a reason for being so specific? Surely all counsellors have been affected by what you talk about.
Well, you're absolutely correct, Jade, and all counsellors have been affected. But I have chosen to focus on the private practice counsellor because each agency who employs counsellors has the right to adopt their own pathway. They have to provide their own approaches, their own direction, their own standards, their own protocols, their own resources. And I feel it to be wholly unfair, unhelpful and unethical, and possibly divisive for me to comment on any particular agency's manner of dealing with a counselling service or their individual counsellors. Besides, as we can see, the agency counsellor had the benefit of all the support which I've just listed. The private practice counsellor, unfortunately, may not have the same support of guidance apart from the supervisor. So, private practice one-to-one therapy, when we look at it, it usually is two people in a room, often not a big room, as most counsellors have practiced pre-COVID, and that for now has become untenable. One of the lesser quoted definitions of grief is an emotional reaction to a huge change in one life which was not planned or desired. So for some of us counsellors, myself included, we went through some aspects of the symptoms of grief: denial, anger, resistance, rigidity, and stubbornness in my own case.
I think that's really interesting, Willie, and definitely something that I can relate to. So could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, all of us private practice counsellors have been forced into facing certain difficult facts. For most of us, our professional practice, built up over years of much study and hard work, seemed to suddenly come to a grinding halt. Even creative, progressive, and quick-thinking counsellors' income have probably seen a decline. Not all existing clients are willing to move to online counselling. Not all counsellors are willing to move to online counselling. Since its arrival, most clients presenting issues are directly or indirectly COVID-related, or at least can be. And if we as counsellors have been discommoded to varying degrees of discomfort by the same COVID, it's easy to see how the client's uncontaminated space could be at best compromised or at worst eroded. Both personal and professional, this is another fact they had to face, both personal and professional self-care for the counsellor has changed. Face-to-face supervision, peer supervision and workshops, all huge sources of nurture and support and hope and further education, all have been moved online, which for most therapists is a slightly more clinical and disconnected feel to it, and where the so important social elements for most of us are missing. And from a personal self-care perspective, a relaxing meal out is not an option. The drives to the sea air and the debriefing and relaxing effects of a good beach walk has been curtailed, and the deprivation of all such external resources eventually adds up.
Absolutely, and mirror what the lack of resources in our clients as well. For the first time, there's a level playing field there, isn't there?
Correct. There is a level, and that's where the danger is, I feel. Yeah,
makes a lot of sense, Willie. So, can we move to the strategic approaches for the private practice counsellor then?
Yeah, Jade. Well, once we're past the transition stage, personal and professional, we're now at of what do we do next. Once we get over the grief stages, as I call them, we have to establish. So the average counsellor's private practice counsellor strategic options range as follows. Assuming the counsellor has little interest in online or phone counselling and that they can afford not to have, then the option is to tell their clients they must wait till the government and the government agencies give us a green light for conditional active presence therapy to return. But we have to ask ourselves, what will that be like for our clients? Will they feel a sense of abandonment? These are things we have to work through. Assuming the counsellor and their client base is good with it, to offer online counselling. This will involve special training. Will current online training, mostly brief, stand up to ethical scrutiny in the event of something going wrong? Can we be sure that all our client base has access to a decent Wi-Fi connection? And where either the counsellor or the client are uncomfortable with online therapy, to offer phone counselling. So they're the strategic options that the counsellor has.
Yeah. And lots of complex nuances amongst all of them, and very personal, depending on who you are as a client and who you are and what your resources are as a counsellor. You mentioned transparency, Willie, earlier on in your subtitle as well. Can I assume that by that you mean ethical considerations?
Absolutely, Jade. Yeah, and if we just take one really interesting perspective of counselling ethics from people who wrote Integrative Counselling and Psychotherapy, Faris and Van Weegen, their quotation is, from a relational perspective, everything we do has the potential of impacting on the well-being of others. This means that ethical decision-making is part and parcel of every therapist's daily working lives. We take that, we can just look at it, and we can see that there is a daily requirement for the counsellor, whatever medium of counselling, to explore it from an ethical perspective. So let's look at some of the main considerations. Therapy from an ethical point of view. Therapy is usually offered on the basis that a temporarily disturbed client comes to a grounded therapist in a safe space to look at the issues that are disturbing them. But now the therapist may also be disturbed, having been moved from the control tower of the therapy room to possibly more uncomfortable and uncontrollable alternative platforms. New methodologies of contracting, particularly where the client is a minor. I work a lot with minors, so the whole contracting piece has to be worked out differently. And indeed, new methodologies of receiving payment for your work have to be created. And these they're all things we have to keep in mind and have to be the practical pieces. Even a more important ethical consideration. Could the client pick up on or assume the therapist is feeling vulnerable in this new platform? For example, should the counsellor be looking at the camera eye or at the screen? Which is the best practice? could the client silently or not silently, consciously or unconsciously begin to take care of the counsellor, offering them online tips? If they are good at online work and they notice you're not, they might say, listen, Willie, can I show you something, how I work that out? And suddenly we're into a dual relationship, and it's so easy for it to happen. And I mean, again, if you look at the definitions of counselling from famous people like Michael Carroll, I had the privilege of Michael lecturing in my supervision training. And if we just look at his definition of counselling, which was pre-COVID, obviously, and we can see how the ethical nuances and implications can arise here, the dynamics. He describes counselling as two individuals sit in a room talking. Welcome to an ordinary counselling session. They are not alone. Pathways trampled by hundreds of other people move through the counselling room. The air buzzes with unseen voices. Some are subtle entrances, invited and uninvited. Yes. Some break in, some intrude, some are dragged in by both, and their presence affects the talking pair. Now, if we look at that as a really good definition of the complexities of a counselling session, we can see how to move that online inevitably has some difficulties associated, or potential difficulties.
I think you're so right, Willie, and the subtleties that you mentioned there around the taking care of and the client moving into helping mode, and it really highlights for me how, as a counsellor, you need to be confident and competent around working online and working remotely, and that's a separate skill completely to work itself, if you like. So it's really something to think about. Is there anything within IACP Code of Ethics to guide counsellors around all of this?
Yeah, good question, Jade. Yeah, well, the IACP Code of Ethics, as we all know, offers guidelines on all aspects of counselling, and they are guidelines. It behoves each individual private practice counsellor to seek and apply the relevance of each guide to any given ethical situation. To seek guidance on the subject matter of this interview, perhaps we need look no further than to use the filter of the 4 principles that IACP use. One is respect for the right and dignity of the client. What's that going to mean now? Well, it'll mean that if we're moving to online or phone counselling, we would require a completely new informed consent document. The client needs to know that this is different, why it's different, what the potential for you is, what the potential for exposure, depending on where the person is doing the online therapy from. And we have to respect the client's own cultural values around the new proposed methodology of therapy. If clients are working from home, as I say, is there a potential exposure issue for the clients in this regard? Are counsellors used to normally having that much information about their clients looking into their kitchens or living rooms? Can the client be sure that it will not be disturbed during their work? Any potential for this would severely reduce the efficacy of the work. You know, we've always tried to work under what we offer clients pre-COVID was a controlled environment where we're pretty certain we're not going to be disturbed for the next 50 odd minutes. Can we offer that? Yes.
I'll just interrupt you there. So apologies, but just as you're saying that, I can hear my 2-year-old screaming in the background. So that may be picked up on this talk. And it's no better timing for that to come into play here. It's just a controlled home environment.
It's perfect. And I was doing, I'll be very careful here, but I was doing a piece of supervision work during the week with the supervisee, obviously, online, Zooming. And at one stage, her daughter came in to ask me something, but mommy brought the daughter in and introduced her to me. And then she brought in all her children and introduced them to me. Now, there is a situation where we move from professional. Now, it's warm, it's beautiful, but there's potential for difficulties there. And so that was a supervisee, not so bad. If that were a client, you can see how that would. So thanks, Jade, for inviting me. So that's the first principle. Sorry, go ahead, yeah.
Oh, that's fine. It's perfect timing. Yeah, apologies.
The second principle from IACP, the second principle is competence. So under the second principle, we need to ethically examine what competence means. Have I been trained to provide therapy in this manner? Is my warm presence requirement sabotaged by signal difficulties, overlapping of conversations? Can the so important skill of silence be lost in this or mistaken for a signal issue? I think the whole thing is different. It's difficult, and I definitely think that, and for me, timing. A huge part of communication when a client is in the room is how I know that the client is finished. And I can allow a silence, and then I can gently say something about that. I'm no longer sure online when the client is finished. So I think that's a problem. And as regards the experience as a counsellor, and here I'm going to go totally into a kind of a funny place, but I've been practicing for over 20 years, and I'm also an avid hurling fan. And I would perhaps use the analogy of watching the All-Ireland hurling final on television or being in Croke Park. In my opinion, it's a different experience entirely, but I accept that not everyone may agree with this. So I'm afraid that online can go too cognitive based. It's all from the chin up. You're looking at probably from the chin up, and the work can be from the chin up. That's just something to look out for. The third ethical principle would be responsibility. And I think we have to be careful with this. If our own ethical value is to view online or phone therapy as perhaps a compromised temporary platform, we need to examine the potential for ethical compromise. Is ethical compromise acceptable in this most unusual situation where the founding fathers of counselling or indeed ethics ever envisaged? What if at some future date we are requested to account for some intervention we did or didn't make during this ethically compromised period? I think that's important as well. And the fourth principle then, and we'll let you in after the fourth principle is integrity. If we view the alternative therapy platforms as not being our preferred methodology, what is our motivation for offering it? At best, is it genuinely to be available to our clients? Or at worst, is it an attempt to maintain our practice and our income? Some suggest that online therapy is best because it's more convenient for clients and therapists. But is convenience high up on the list of constituents of best practice? And if for many years we have been encouraging our teenagers to put away that technology and go and form real friendships and form real relationships, should we as professionals not be applying some of that to ourselves now? So they're the four principles, yeah.
Very, very interesting, Willie. And this talk could almost take the form of a debate if we were to really, really get into that.
Yes.
Lots of food for talk there, for thought, should I say. Brilliant. Finally, Willie, can you give us any advice then with all of that in mind? What can we do?
Well, thank you. And by the way, I'm glad it's not a debate because I could be totally similar, I think. But I'm just giving my own honest view as practicing for so long. Yeah, I think a few bits of advice. Obviously, as therapists, we don't give advice, but as somebody delivering this talk, perhaps I can. So I would say to be, watch out for the government and the IACP updates. Watch out for all those updates around the conditional return to face-to-face work, because there are updates on that. We have to follow them. But provided we have taken on board all the above-named ethical concerns, our choice may well be to offer online counselling. In that regard, be sure and do some recognised training to work online. IACP offer that. I think we'll find other avenues as well. Be sure your supervisor knows you're doing this before doing it, not afterwards. Be sure your insurance company knows you're doing this beforehand, not afterwards. Practice being online if you're not that you haven't been used to. Use family and friends to have conversations with them, and you get more used to it so that you will look grounded on it. You can seek support to design and refine the difference in contracting and payment methodologies. I think we'll get help with that. And this is going back to a point we made earlier, and you joined in on it. There is this risk of clients taking care of us. So if clients ask us, as their counsellor, how we are coping with the whole crisis, it's best, I think, to address the elephant in the room. But our body language here is more important than our words, which I think should be kept to a minimum. If the whole reason for our work is to enable people to find solid ground in a crisis, whereas we will briefly respond to our client's caring query, we will quickly display that we have found our solid ground. I think that's important. Otherwise, we could have two clients in the one room. Not great. At all costs, we should avoid all general conversations around the subject of COVID, or the whole area of consultancy, where our clients may expect us to be experts at forecasting on the whole area of the direction and longevity of this virus. All such conversations should be kept to a minimum, I think. And pretty much finally, from a self-care perspective, even though, as I have raised above, there may be certain ethical concerns around doing therapy online, there's no such concerns around using your chosen online platform to keep in touch with colleagues. Supervision is wonderful, but entails specific clinical supervisor roles and responsibilities of the supervisor. So in the best interest of self-care, liaising with colleagues on a regular basis, such as me, and what I'm doing now with you, during this time of isolation and uncertainty, this would be, in my view, that perhaps a really essential survival tool. And finally, Jade, I would like to thank you for providing me with this platform, and I would like to take this opportunity to wish all private practice counsellors out there safety, health, and that their career will go the direction they want it to go. Thank you, Jade.
Thank you, Willie. That's been extremely insightful and has definitely given myself and hopefully our viewers lots to think about from the client and the counsellor perspective. Thanks as always, Willie, for your vast knowledge and experience and for sharing that with us. It's been great.
Jade.
And thanks to everybody for joining in. Take care.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.